Budapest. Night of December 3rd to 4th, 2008. A young French woman is walking home from a pub. Around 3 a.m., she enters the bridge over the Danube River connecting Buda and Pest. And it is there that something happens that remains a mystery to this day. Her purse with her phone, money, and documents was found on the bridge, but Ophélie Bretnacher herself disappeared without a trace. This mysterious case has stirred not only Hungary, but all of France. However, Hungarian investigators and the French public had completely different theories about what might have happened that night. Today, we will look at all the versions and consider which one seems more likely. Dark File. Deadly Good Stories. For nearly 40 years now, students from European Union countries have been able to enjoy the privilege of international exchange under the Erasmus program. The main goal of this program, whose name refers to the great humanist and educator of the Age of Enlightenment, Erasmus of Rotterdam, is to raise the level of education, offering students the opportunity to develop and study at foreign universities throughout Europe. Over the years, for many aspiring students, participating in the Erasmus program has been a big dream, and the vast majority of young people have taken advantage of the opportunity they received. Not only studying, but also working or doing internships in places that were completely new to them. At the same time, learning not only the history, but especially the culture of the countries where they had the opportunity to spend some time. Today, I will tell you about one such exchange, which did not end with a happy ending. Because unfortunately, for some Erasmus exchange participants, this dream trip turned out to be a real nightmare. One such person was a 22-year-old French student who left her homeland more than 15 years ago with high hopes and even greater excitement. But in the Hungarian capital, instead of the desired development and new knowledge, she found death. Everyone who knew her had no doubt. In the eyes of her friends, 22-year-old Ophélie Bretnacher was a cheerful and kind-hearted person, constantly gushing with optimism even in the most difficult moments. She loved interacting with people and above all was curious about the world. She dreamed of learning about other countries, their history, culture, and customs. Her boyfriend Gregory strongly supported her in this. They had been a couple for several years, forming a successful relationship. At first, he didn't want Ophélie to travel alone to places about which dark stories circulated in France. However, knowing that he could trust his beloved implicitly, he changed his attitude over time. After her freshman year, she spent a vacation in Prague, where she took part in a training course related to her field of study, international finance. Her stay in the Czech capital made her realize that Central Europe was not as gray and boring as she had previously thought. That the image of former socialist bloc countries, still firmly entrenched in the minds of Westerners, is far from the truth. She saw with her own eyes that the region, perhaps a bit poorer, in no way resembled places straight out of post-apocalyptic movies, with its sea of ruins of crumbling big-box blocks of flats, rusting wrecks of old cars and the vastness of the gray poor, warming their frozen hands over burning trash garbage cans at night. In bustling Prague, she met many people with whom she became friends. They were exactly like her. Friendly, smiling, and funny. She went to parties with them or wandered the streets of Prague at night. The lessons she learned from these nocturnal escapades came as a huge surprise to herself. Contrary to what she had heard before, the capital on the Vltava River was safe. Quite the contrary, it was much safer than her Paris. No one accosted her, no one tried to rob her. There were no members of local gangs lurking in dark alleys, treating mugging people as their full-time job. In Paris, single women did not go out for night walks, especially through places besieged by clusters of these less native Parisians. In Prague, this problem did not exist at all. On many occasions, she returned alone to her hotel in the middle of the night, and not even a hair of her head fell off. Ophélie was enthralled with Prague, so much so that when she returned to France, she wanted to visit another capital. Her choice fell on Hungary's Budapest, a beautiful, historic city, full of contrasts, great opportunities, but also many unfair stereotypes. The 22-year-old student wanted to see for herself if she would feel as wonderful on the Danube as she had previously felt on the Vltava River. To realize her goal, she applied for the Erasmus program. She hoped that through an international student exchange, she would be able to spend more time in Budapest for less money. And when she received a reply from her university that she had qualified for the program and that she would spend a full year in the Hungarian capital, she could not sit still for joy. In early January 2008, the plane from Paris with an excited Ophélie on board landed safely at Budapest airport after a 2.5-hour flight. Here was a new phase in the life of this French student. However, she had no idea that it would also be the last stage. After arriving in the Hungarian capital, she settled in Buda, the western part of the city. She found accommodation in the home of a married couple of local surgeons. In exchange for free hospitality, the French student took care of their young children in her spare time. She would take them for walks or pick them up from kindergarten. Of course, such an arrangement suited both parties as much as possible. On the Danube, she continued her studies in international finance and quickly made friends with a group of students from other European countries who, like her, found themselves in Budapest through the Erasmus program. Together, they not only studied, but also visited Budapest's pubs and venues located mainly in Pest, the eastern part of the city. While studying, she simultaneously did an internship at an accounting firm. She liked Budapest even more than Prague. She delighted in almost everything: the architecture, the monuments, the charming streets, the beautiful parks, and the extraordinary openness of the people. The vast majority of them friendly to all foreigners. As is usually the case, the more pleasant moments, the faster time passes. In early December, her year-long stay in Budapest began to draw to a close. Ophélie was torn. On the one hand, she didn't want to leave, but on the other, she already had her next big plans in mind. First, on December 20th, 2008, she was to go to Vienna, where her parents had been living for 6 months. Her father had started working for a marketing company there a few months earlier. As soon as the opportunity arose, he arranged for his daughter to attend a training course at his home, which she was scheduled to start right after Christmas. During the summer, she planned a joint trip with her boyfriend to Malaysia, and upon her return, the couple intended to live together in Paris and later to volunteer together in a Latin American country. The world stood before her, and yet she was depressed at the thought that the time was approaching to say goodbye to Budapest. Ophélie rather avoided the nightlife. However, she allowed herself to be persuaded by her friends to go on one such party outing together, because her occasion was unique. A combination of a Santa Claus party and a farewell party. On Wednesday evening, December 3rd, 2008, a group of students chose the now-defunct Portside de Cuba pub, located almost in the center of crowded Budapest, as the venue for their party. Good fun, Latin rhythms, dancing, and fairly cheap alcohol attracted many young people, mostly students, to this place. Ophélie and her friends also had a great time. The restaurant, which should have closed at 1 o'clock that night because of the huge number of guests, allowed the participants to party longer. The first to feel the fatigue was Ophélie. From about 1:30 to 3 in the morning, she tried to persuade her companions to leave, but they didn't even want to hear about it. Therefore, the Frenchwoman decided to go home alone. A quarter of an hour later, she was already standing at the bus stop, waiting for any bus heading toward her home. In vain. Budapest's nighttime public transportation was not very extensive in those years, and it was already almost impossible to take a bus across the Danube at that hour to Buda, where French lived. Not wanting to waste time waiting in vain, the 22-year-old decided to return home on foot. A half-hour walk awaited her, along fairly well-lit streets across the chain bridge. She knew the way well, and it didn't even cross her mind that something bad could happen to her. The married couple of doctors she was staying with first became concerned in the morning when they left for work. The student's room was empty, and her bed looked as if no one had slept on it the night before. They thought, however, that the farewell party had probably been considerably prolonged, and the French girl had decided to stay overnight with one of her colleagues. A few hours later, however, they received a call from the daycare center, informing them that still no one had picked up their children. Their anxiety returned with redoubled force. It was Ophélie who was supposed to do it. They tried to call her, but the 22-year-old's phone was turned off. Their home phone wasn't answering either. It was then that they first thought something bad must have happened. When, upon immediately arriving at their home, they confirmed the continued absence of their resident. They decided to contact the police as soon as possible.
They reported the disappearance of a French student to us, even pointing out the specific establishment where she was supposed to have been partying the night before. We accepted the report, but I admit that we initially approached the case with a bit of disregard, as it is well known that students are often able to party so much at our place that they arrive at their homes quite late.
Shortly after visiting the police station, doctors contacted the missing woman's parents, who were in Austria. Her father immediately called the French embassy in Budapest. Instead of the expected help, however, he heard that Hungary's capital is one of the safest cities in Europe, so there was no reason to worry that his daughter was definitely fine and would soon return home safe and sound. This, however, did not reassure the terrified father, especially since moments later he heard almost identical words when he contacted the Budapest police. But soon, a certain finding completely changed the attitude of local officers, turning the whole case upside down. The rather sluggish investigation gained momentum when it turned out that on the night of the disappearance, 2 Italian students had found a woman's purse on the chain bridge connecting Buda and Pest. They brought the find to the nearest police station, but the officer on duty shoved it somewhere in a corner next to other lost items. Actually, it was by chance that one of the officers decided to look inside. There was a cell phone, a wallet with cash and a payment card, and some documents in the name of Ophélie Bretnacher. After entering the data into the system, it turned out that the 22-year-old student was listed as a missing person. Police officers quickly reached the Italian finders. They testified that the purse was lying quite on its side, in such a place that it was impossible for a woman crossing the bridge on the sidewalk to accidentally lose it. Rather, someone must have put it there on purpose.
The search for French began with a check of the city's surveillance records, and indeed the cameras recorded her just before 3 o'clock at night. She was walking heading toward the chain bridge. She was carrying a purse found later on the bridge. No one accosted her. No one followed her.
One camera captured the moment she enters the bridge, but the CCTV on the other side of the river did not record her stepping off it. On the bridge itself, unfortunately, there was no video surveillance. Her purse was found at exactly 3 a.m., which was only a few minutes after the student entered the bridge. The Italians testified that at the time they themselves crossed the Danube, they did not see any young woman on the bridge, either on one side or the other. Investigators found their testimony credible. Questioning the friends she was playing with that night did not help much. No one had seen her since she said goodbye to them and left the premises. Her phone was checked. It was disconnected. It turned out that it had remained inactive since she left the pub. The 22-year-old did not make or receive any calls during that time. She did not send as well as receive even a single text message. She did not connect to the internet. Shortly after she entered the bridge, her phone went off. The police officer's next step was to question all the cab drivers operating that night near the route Ophélie traveled. None of them had seen her. Could the Italian students have had something to do with the mysterious disappearance? This thread was being checked. The surveillance recordings on the 2 sides of the bridge indicated that the timing of their walk from one end to the other matched the fast gait of the adult men. This seemed to confirm their testimony that they were in a great hurry at the time. And when, crossing to the other side, they noticed a woman's purse set aside on the side under a pillar. They decided to pick it up and take it to the nearest police station, just over 600 meters from the bridge.
We reasoned that they would not have had time to stop on the chain bridge to accost the woman walking with them, and certainly could not have assaulted her, for example, by throwing her off the bridge afterwards. If that had been the case, the two would have come off the bridge on the other side, at least tens of seconds later than the city's CCTV indicated.
Besides, according to investigators, if they had assaulted the woman in order to steal her purse, after all, they would not have returned it intact to the nearest police station, including her phone, cash, and credit card. She walked onto the bridge, but did not get off it again. So everything pointed to the fact that whatever had happened to the Frenchwoman had happened right on it. There was only one explanation for how she disappeared. She must have fallen into the river, and that's exactly what the Hungarian investigators focused on. They began to wonder what had led to this. Could she have fainted and fallen off the bridge? That was unlikely to be an option. The thick iron railings are high enough that it was impossible to accidentally fall off. Admittedly, it is possible to squeeze through them at the bottom, but after all, a person who loses consciousness for some reason falls where he stands, rather than crawling like an earthworm toward the nearest crevice to accidentally fall out through it. There was also a second option. Someone attacked her and then threw her over the railing into the water, but the surveillance footage clearly indicated that only 2 Italians had stepped off the bridge at the time it must have happened. Even if for some reason they decided, under the influence of the moment to that being almost on the run, to throw a woman they accidentally passed on the bridge into the Danube, and then go on as if nothing ever happened, and give her purse with its full contents to the police, there was no evidence of this. This possibility was initially considered, but was quickly ruled out. There was also a third option, according to investigators, the most likely one. The French student decided to bargain for her own life, and after leaving her purse right next to the pillar, she simply walked over the railing and jumped into the icy river. The fact that her body has still not been found was explained by the strong river current, which would have carried the corpse much further. A week after the disappearance, Hungarian police declared that everything pointed to the latter hypothesis as the explanation for the mysterious disappearance, and that it was likely that her body had swum with the current, and that it was only a matter of time before it was found. Such results of the investigation were disagreed with by the missing woman's father, who in an interview with the French daily La Parisienne vehemently denied it. He stated that his daughter could not have taken her own life because she had big plans for her life. Besides, she was happy. She was surrounded by lots of friends, and on top of that, she was planning a future together with her boyfriend. However, he admitted that with each passing day, the chances of finding her alive diminish. The police, after announcing the most likely theory, clearly lost their enthusiasm for further searching. Apparently, they were only waiting for the body to be found so that a later autopsy would prove them right. In their view, the case of the disappearance was clear. That's when Ophelie's parents sprang into action. On December 15th, her father arrived in the Hungarian capital, accompanied by a lawyer and several French journalists. At the time, he told the media that, according to him, his daughter had been the victim of a crime, that she had probably been kidnapped on the bridge by unknown perpetrators who, avoiding the city's cameras, had taken her to an unspecified location. At the same time, he offered a reward of 2 million forints, which at the time amounted to nearly 8,000 euros, for anyone whose testimony would contribute to establishing the truth about Ophelie's fate.
Despite the promised reward, no new clues were received. No new witnesses appeared, and the old ones did not miraculously recover their memories. We understood the man's attempts to suppress the idea that his daughter might have taken her own life, but there was nothing to indicate that we, the police, were wrong in thinking that the whole case was not as mysterious as the French media claimed.
And the French disappearance case was by then the #1 topic on the scène. French public opinion accused the Hungarian police of lack of commitment and going for the easy way. They were reproached for their incompetence, sluggishness, and indifference to the tragedy of the resident foreigner. In early January 2009, more than 500,000 people gathered in the Parisian Champ de Mars. Through their march of silence, they demanded the strengthening of cooperation between the French and Hungarian police to investigate the mysterious disappearance of their compatriot. Representatives of this protest were received at their home by the Hungarian ambassador, promising to meet all demands. At the same time, more than 100 French students in Budapest walked in complete silence along the route taken by Ophélie just before her disappearance. A number of French parliamentarians also publicly expressed their outrage at the mishandling of such an important investigation. The French president personally contacted the Hungarian prime minister, demanding to influence Hungarian investigators. This political intervention had the desired effect. More than a dozen additional investigators were brought into the investigation. They were given top-down instructions to check with the utmost thoroughness all, even the least likely hypotheses. Only then did specially trained divers check the bottom of the Danube not only in the vicinity of the chain bridge, but also a few hundred meters away from it. However, neither the body of the missing Frenchwoman nor any part of her clothing was encountered. On January 23, 2009, French dailies reported a major breakthrough in the case. La Parisienne wrote, "Hungarian investigators have reached new witnesses. One of them is a well-known lawyer in Budapest. His testimony is sensational. He claims that on January 10th, more than a month after the French student went missing, he saw her in downtown Budapest. Dirty, in torn clothes, she was begging on the street for something to eat." The article went on to say that the aforementioned lawyer initially paid no attention to the beggar woman, but later recognized her in a photo when he watched a TV report about the disappearance. The next day he returned to the place, but there was no trace of the mysterious woman. He was not the only one to meet Ophélie. 2 other men also reported to the police, claiming to have seen the missing woman in 2 different parts of the Hungarian capital. Each time, she was begging on the street. Investigators immediately checked these reports, but to no avail. The woman in question was nowhere to be found, nor was she visible on the city's video surveillance system. Ultimately, the lead was deemed unreliable. However, this did not prevent the family of the missing French woman from regaining their faith that their daughter would one day return home. Her father was now firmly convinced that the girl had simply lost her memory as a result of some tragic accident and had been wandering somewhere in Budapest's nooks and crannies ever since. A private investigator hired by him arrived in Hungary, but he did not come across any clues confirming this sensational hypothesis. It took several weeks for another breakthrough. On the morning of February 12, 2009, a Budapest police spokesman made the announcement at a hastily convened conference.
Yesterday, around 6 p.m., on the banks of the Danube River, a little over 8 kilometers south of the Chain Bridge, 2 riverboatmen spotted the drifting body of a young woman. According to the information we have at the moment, we cannot rule out that this is the body of a 22-year-old French student who went missing in our city in early December last year.
According to the doctor who conducted an examination of the corpse at the site, the body had been in the water for at least 2 months. The degree of decomposition made it impossible to directly identify the deceased. However, the jewelry and clothing she possessed indicated that she was Ophélie. DNA tests were to confirm this. The family of the missing student was immediately informed of this discovery. The question of the cause of her death was to be answered by an autopsy conducted a few hours later, and this, according to the medical examiner, occurred as a result of drowning. However, he found absolutely no traces on the body of the deceased that could suggest that she had lost her life as a result of a physical assault or any other crime. A few days later, the worst fears of everyone involved in the case were confirmed. DNA tests left no doubt. The corpse found belonged to Ophélie. In the first half of March, the body of the 22-year-old student was transported to France. A second autopsy was conducted in Paris at the request of the victim's family's lawyer, but this time too, the results of the examination ruled out the involvement of third parties. The forensic doctor's conclusion was similar to that reached by his Hungarian counterpart. The death was due to asphyxiation from drowning and was the result of an unfortunate accident or taking one's own life. In an official letter sent to the French Attorney General, the father of the deceased student questioned the results of both autopsies, still insisting that his daughter was the victim of a crime. After consulting with his lawyer, he listed what he considered to be all the ambiguities surrounding the investigation and his daughter's death. These included the failure to analyze diatoms from the deceased's lungs to determine exactly which part of the river the death occurred in. He also noted that Hungarian police had failed to produce an analysis report on phone logs along the route of her last journey. A private investigator hired by her father reached a man claiming that while walking through the night of December 3rd to 4th, 2008, just off the Chain Bridge, he heard a woman's scream coming from somewhere on the bridge. This occurred just before 3 o'clock, which was around the time the 22-year-old went missing. The next day, the witness reported to the police, but the investigators showed no interest. They told him to wait at home for an appropriate summons to testify. As it was to turn out later, the man was never questioned. The father's last doubt was where the body was discovered. It was located in a place where it should not have been. It was fished out of the so-called dead drain of the Danube on Chepel Island. This is a body of water connected to the river. Water from the Danube flowing south with the current does not flow directly into it. If in fact the woman had fallen into the river near the chain bridge, the strong river current would have carried her body far beyond Budapest. One French river movement expert even stated that in the 2 months that passed between the time of the disappearance and the finding of the body, the corpse could have traveled up to several hundred kilometers along the Danube. According to the father, the above conclusions were strong evidence in favor of the fact that someone had placed his daughter's body in the aforementioned place on purpose in order to delay finding them as much as possible. The French prosecutor's office sent the document to the Hungarian prosecutor's office, but the authorities there remained deaf to the requests and appeals of the deceased student's father, who did not live to hear back.
In our opinion, the 22-year-old French girl was not the victim of any crime of a criminal nature in our country, although we understand that the circumstances of her death may raise understandable doubts, especially among the people closest to the victim. We were unable to determine whether she died as a result of an unfortunate accident or suicide.
Despite the French pressure on the Budapest police for several years, in April 2014, the investigation into the student's death was officially closed, despite the family's assurances that they would not rest until they discovered the truth about the last moments of their daughter's life. Since then, and more than 10 years have passed, no new information about this mysterious case has appeared in the media. Mysterious, of course, for the French because, according to the Hungarians, there was simply no secret there. Dark File. Deadly good stories.